Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the place where we combine community conversations about magic, energy, all things spiritual, and we share our wisdom combined with yours to create a real interesting conversation most of the time
Most of the
about
time.
about things that we feel are important, or at least in our memory banks, or what have you, because we've both had some skin in the game for a very long time, and we
Yeah.
are here to um you know share, just share. I mean, we're both teachers, we're both professionals at it, and this kind of platform felt important to connect with you all. So we were missing in action last week. Hi, Deb. So we'll be saying hi to everybody. We miss you. We are back. And the topic today, as far as important topics are concerned, is magical etiquette. Now, we've covered ethics before, but etiquette is a different angle here. So we're both going to be covering from our perspective. But before we dive too deep into that subject, we definitely have some introductions to make for newbies, and for you oldies, just kick up your feet, or this is a great time to go grab your tea and wait for us to get through this part. So I am
Ooh,
Dahlia
yeah.
Rose. I am the founder of the Conduit School, and I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, and a conduit for high vibrational energies. And I do this by guiding my students and my clients through spiritual development, different energy practices, meditation, all of the spiritual enhancement things that I can possibly learn and get my hands on and then give back. I was talking about Gene Keys 2 weeks ago. So the rabbit hole is deep, and it's deep because I believe that we need to expand the way that we look at healing. And we can only do that by returning to ourselves, increasing our awareness, and being more empowered than we ever thought possible. So that is who I am over here on the east side.
My name's Katrina Raspold. I work as a professional witch and spiritual healer as well. I've been a witch for a little over 40 years. I've published a number of books, written a number of books on the subject of various subjects of metaphysics and witchcraft and all sorts of things like that, uncrossing, and also some, I guess you'd say, what's the word? Not anthology, but what Crossroads of Conjure would be kind of a not like what's a book that's a documentary? My brain's not working. It's an objective sort of academic work on the
Oh,
idea of folk magic in the southern United States. So yeah, there's that. Um, I oh y'all excuse me for just a minute. This is going to sound terrible, and I'm sorry to do this. Dahlia, don't let me forget I need to tell you something after we finish this, okay? We didn't get
okay.
to have our pre-show. It was all completely my fault. We have no power here in a good part of California right now, or at least a good part of El Dorado County. And I had to do generator work and all kinds of stuff. So I'm just rushing in, sitting down. Poor Dahlia's on the message, like, are you okay?
Well, Mercury's in Gatorade, so here we go.
Boy, is it ever. So, hi, y'all. It's good to see y'all. So that's what I do. I do teaching. I do writing. I do blogging. I have most of what I do goes on at my Patreon account, but you can also just go to katrinaraspold.com. I've got a link tree there. My whole website is now just a link tree, and it just lists every place where you can find me on the entire fucking internet. So hi, y'all. It's good to see you. And it's been a hell of a day. I just love it. So we're talking about a really interesting subject today with the magical etiquette. As I've mentioned in the broadcast before, what happens is that Dahlia submits a list of, let's talk about this, and I submit a list of let's talk about this, and then we kind of jump between the two. And this is one of the ones that I listed, but because of the way Mercury stirred my Gatorade today, I didn't have a chance to even reread my own material. So basically, we're going to be pulling this like so many other episodes out of our collective asses, but it'll still be good. You know, you can trust us to still have fun and have a good show. So you're going to be seeing the raw of this. We didn't get to have the pre-show. I didn't get to iron it down. We didn't get to make it all, well, you know, you can bring up this and then I know I'll bring up this. It'll be great. It'll flow smoothly. No, we're just straight out what we do in the shadows improv tonight.
Oh, I love that show.
So
Absolutely love
lots of
that show.
fun. Glad to be here. Proud to be back with my dear friend Dahlia. It was also my fault we missed last week because I had a doctor's appointment that was essential that came up that they could, of course, Mercury, Gatorade, etc., could only do it during the exact hour that we do this. So
We should have an episode, like at least because Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year. We should have an episode where we just list off like everything that happened. Because for me, I have an electronic doorknob and it died. So like at the 11th hour, anybody could walk in the house because we'd had no doorknob. so you know, and in the grand scheme, it was like, okay, if all you take mercurial gods is the doorknob, we're okay. Like, you know, but no power. Yikes, really and truly, yikes.
yeah, I almost had a moment earlier because little known fact that people, it might not be as little known as I think it is, but a lot of people do not expect this of a pagan priest, is that Eric's leanings tend to be very capitalist and very conservative. And my son is visiting from Canada, and he and I are both on the very much the liberal end of the spectrum there. And so I accidentally, talk about Mercury retrograde, today stumbled face first into initiating a political conversation I did not intend to do. I thought we'd get through Joe's entire week of a visit and not do that. I just stepped right into the pile of mud and it just started. I'm like, oh, it's out of control. I can't stop it. And that's the kind of thing that tends to happen in Mercury retrograde, are these conversations that go sideways or take a direction you're not expecting. And sometimes it can be a nice little rabbit hole to come to fall into. This was not. So you and I are both Virgos. Happy birthday to my favorite Virgo of all time. And we really get hit by them. Either they're our best friend or our worst enemy, depending on where, how that retrograde lands. But yeah, sometimes they're friendlier to us than others because Mercury's ruled by, or Virgo's ruled by Mercury, and sometimes they're harder on us, I think.
Yeah. This one I think is in our sign, isn't it?
Dear Lord.
Yeah. Good luck. Godspeed, fellow Virgos.
It's just, I didn't even know it was coming. I usually have track on this sort of thing, and some stuff come up in the last couple 3 weeks where I got distracted from my jam, with the astrology lineup. Usually I can kind of feel, okay, it's got to be getting close to full moon because I can feel it. It's got to be getting close to new moon because I can feel it. But for the last month or so, my perception has just been really altered by stuff going on and distractions. And this was one of them, and I didn't see it coming, and I just felt bludgeoned. Like, why is all this shit happening? Of course, if you got to depend on Facebook for all your information. It's like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde. Well, okay, there you go. That makes sense.
Well, Deb is sheltering with us.
Lord. Shelter in place, folks.
Right.
So magical etiquette. So when we talked about that, like you said, we've talked about ethics, and that's different. Ethics is, what should you do as a human who also moves energy? And what should you not do? What is the collective amongst reasonable folk idea of what you shouldn't do as a person that moves magical energy? What is over the line and what is to the line and what is okay? And that was a whole conversation. It was a real good conversation. You can research that in our archives. But this is more about how you act as an individual in the company of other magical people. And that's different, because you can be a very ethical person as far as your energy movement goes, but have no damn sense when it comes to people skills as a magical person.
Have seen
That's
that.
my impression. And we've all seen people like that.
Yeah.
So
Um,
what's your experience on that, Dee?
so typically, metaphysical spaces, magical spaces, energy spaces invite in people who have been black sheeps, or people who, the common saying, I don't like people, like people that don't like people because they've been mistreated, and so reasonably so. And in terms of etiquette, it can sometimes be a little bitey when you're in these spaces, because you still have there is no opportunity to not deal with people in most situations. I mean, if you are a solo practitioner of any kind, great. Maybe you can avoid people for the most part, or at least on your terms. But as far as etiquette is concerned, it can be, I've seen things get a little bitey. I've seen, how do I want to classify this? Like, uh, it's my way or the highway kind of setups. I have seen, uh, individuals feel that their tenure in energy work or magic makes them better than others, which I don't know if I will ever buy into. I mean, experience. See, there's high Mercury. Experience uh, does add value, but it doesn't preclude you from learning. So yeah, and then I've seen really, not to be Debbie Downer here, I've definitely seen some spaces and have held spaces where I've watched people um act on their kindest, most beautiful selves and support people in the group. I've had that experience. I went to a small gathering where I attended with an individual, and then when we got there, he was like, "You're not going to want to be around me." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute. I came here
Yeah.
with you, and there's 15 other people I don't know. So what happened?" And in that moment, I had somebody come over and just say, "Hey, this is what you can expect. This is what we're going to do, how it may impact you, but be open." And so there are definitely, when it comes to energetics and spaces like that and magical spaces, there are definitely those little angels that kind of come in. And it wasn't a rescuing moment. It was definitely very empowering, but they show you the best side of humanity. So that's, when it comes to ethics and the conversation, I feel like we kind of flow between personalities and
Mhm.
attitudes. That kind of your framework as well.
Yeah, it is. And one of the things, and of course, my realm tends to be gearing more toward witchcraft and paganism. Yours tends more toward New Age and healing and um, the non-labeled items sometimes. Um, but with mine, one of the things I've always said is that in paganism, its greatest strength is its inclusivity,
Hmm.
meaning that in paganism, everybody is welcome. It doesn't matter what genitalia you have in your pants, whether that matches your, excuse me a minute, let me get rid of this, whether that matches your outside appearance or presentation. It doesn't matter where you go to church. It doesn't matter how you were raised. What matters is, what are you presenting right now, and an interest in being included and being hopefully compassionate to the people around you. So it's very inclusive. There's no us and them, except that there's us and them. And that's where it gets a little bit weird. So I've always said that our greatest strength is our inclusivity, but also our greatest weakness is our inclusivity. Because in that situation, which is beautiful, you bring together a lot of different personalities and a lot of different neurodiversities that other groups might be uncomfortable with or might shun. Uh, and you bring together a lot of the fringe elements that really have some intense borderline personality disorder behaviors
Mm.
that can be a little bit scary. And so another thing that tends to come up, and I'm still on this inclusivity rant, is a lot of paganism and the presentation that paganism has now in America grew out of the hippie movement.
Mm.
And the hippie movement was all about free love and I would say I say gratuitous sex, but I don't mean that. Lots and lots of sex. Let's say that. And so you have a lot of elder pagans who are very sexually demonstrative.
Mm.
And that is really uncomfortable when you have people who are very sovereign regarding their bodies and regarding their sexuality. And so when comments are made or people are overly creeper, or just have a vibe that exudes that sexuality, it makes people really uncomfortable sometimes. And so we have a lot of moving parts on this thing called paganism that has a lot of pitfalls for discomfort. And I think that's where I wrote a column at one point on pagan etiquette, and that's kind of where a lot of that grew from, was how can we come together as a very disconnected group of people called pagans, in my case, my people, and create a code of behavior that is okay with everybody,
Mm.
where we can say, yeah, that's uncomfortable and we shouldn't be doing that. Because as soon as you do that, you've got another person saying, well, that impedes my ability to be myself. And that in itself is a microcosm of the bigger macrocosm going on in America right now, which is people saying, I should be able to say this and not have repercussions because I have these amendment rights. Well, you have the right to say it. You don't have protection from the results of saying that.
Right.
And so we really see that a lot in paganism because of the free love foundation on which it was built. And I'm kind of picking on the sexuality because that tends to be how it comes out a lot. We
Interesting.
have a lot, let's face it, paganism had a lot of dirty old men in it. And it has a lot of dirty old women in it too. Eric, my husband, for instance, is very protective of his body. He'll hug people like mad, especially if he's drinking. He's Mr. I love you, But he does, if it's somebody he doesn't know, he doesn't want them to come up and touch him. He doesn't like to hug people he doesn't genuinely care about. And so he's very sovereign with his body. And when we first started having, say, pagan gatherings, the pagan pride events and that sort of thing, he would wear a kilt. He looked really good. He cleans up real nice. And so people would want pictures with him. And these women are like, will you touch my boobs? And he's like, no, I will not actually touch your boobs.
Wow.
And they're trying to grab him, in very private places. And he's like, no, we're not doing that. I'll take a picture of you. I'll even put my arm around you, but that's uncomfortable for me. And so etiquette becomes this question of personal space and also things that encroach upon another person's ability to be themselves in a safe way. And I came up with just a few things to rattle off here that we can kind of go into. One is knowing when to speak and when not to speak. And I see this a lot in my gatherings. If I'm having a class,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm having, like we have a class called Conjure by Candlelight, and the whole point of that is everybody talks.
Okay.
But when you have a limited amount of material you need to cover in a class in a 2-hour period or a certain limited amount of time, sometimes you've got one or two students that are just trying to take over the conversation because they have a lot to share and they have a lot of questions and they have a lot to comment on. And it ends up being a 4-hour class when you did not prepare for that and we're not set up for that. Sometimes there's times that it's really uncomfortable because nobody's saying anything.
Mm.
I had a friend named Rafa. We all love Rafa to death. But the first time we saw Rafa, we were having a conjure by no, it was a goddess ICU, where we were talking about feminine issues. And Rafa comes in and she looks like the fucking trench coat mafia, man. She's got on the black trench coat and the black Doc Martens, and her hair's all dyed back, and she's wearing the black dress and the black makeup, and she just kind of strides in and plops down the chair. None of us knew who she was. And so she comes in and she's just sitting there. And we're all talking back and forth because it's a lot like Conjure by Candlelight. And we're all yakking and sharing. And she's just sitting there like this, just looking all gothy and intimidating and everything. And we're like, who the fuck is this? And why are they not speaking? And so everybody's talking. And in the last 15 minutes, she goes, okay, well, this was really good. So I'm going to talk about what I was thinking while you guys were talking. And she just goes, natter, 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 natter. And we're like, this is the oldest person on earth. And they're just now opening their mouth. And so it can be weird to know when to talk and when not to talk. Healthy debate we should hit on. Touching items that are sacred that don't belong to you. Respecting people who have been at this a long time and determining whether they are worthy of that respect. Dealing with different neurodiverse personalities, and when to observe and watch and when to critique. That's what I've got for some bullet points.
Okay.
Go ahead.
While you were going through the touching piece of everything that you were talking about, I was taken back to some things that are sort of becoming more prevalent in my circles, and then one of my mentor's circles. They are actually the person that sort of brought it to my attention, because it was automatic, but now it's intentional for me, which is on the energy side of things, not invading other people's energy without their permission. So not only I'm not going to mess with your energy when I'm not around you piece, but also in these circles and in these spaces, rather than assuming we're all just going to gel energy and it's going to be a great time, we actually set the intention that if you do not want your energy to be wholly and completely part of the experience, like, you can maintain your separateness and still be a part of the group, because there could be a number of things going on. I mean, you could be next to someone whose frequency is similar to an abuser that you had in your life, and as we start to merge and gel and kind of go through our ceremony, ritual, healing, what have you, you experience a level of discomfort that is on a subconscious level, and you don't know why. And so your energy starts to go into a frenzy or in protection mode. You don't know why. Now you're uncomfortable. Now you maybe want to leave. And so just that piece on touching goes beyond the physical. It goes beyond the literal, and it starts to ebb into the energetic, emotional, and mental space as well. I've had other instances where we have to be mindful of where people are taken mentally if there is trauma involved. So these are all, to me, etiquette issues that I like to see get addressed more. I can't say that I have, but for sure, considering, okay, I can't just march into somebody's field. I can't just make them talk about their experiences. We have to approach this delicately. And I will say I've seen it, thankfully, in like kink spaces there's already, like, if it's a healthy kink space, a lot of permissions and things like that. But one of my favorite kink teachers is like, hey, we aren't necessarily going to do introductions because not everybody feels comfortable. To me, that is a level of etiquette that should be expanded on, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I've noticed, like, with rituals and with classes, sometimes, like you said, you don't always know why someone is there. And
Right.
I have had times that people came because they don't want to share. They don't even always know what you're going to be teaching about. They know it's a safe space.
Right.
And they just need to be in a safe space, in public, with witnesses, so they don't hurt themselves, or so they don't take an action that they're like, they don't text their ex or something, you know, that there's something that they're needing to regulate their energy in some way. And they do that by being around other people where they're accountable for their actions.
Right.
And sometimes they're grieving and they just need to sit and heal around other people and just be. They don't want to contribute. They're not there to teach. They're not there to share. They're just there to just be present somewhere. And that's a really hard thing to learn as a presenter, as a teacher, because you want that interaction. You want them to be really engaged with what you're saying and the importance of what you're teaching. And sometimes they just need to be. And so that's why when I'm teaching a class, I have certain people I can depend on that are going to be there, that I can say, well, how are you feeling about this? Or what's your experience with this? And I know they're going to be excited and eager to share. Or I know, like our friend Eric Wolf, you know, if it's about a rock, I'm bringing him into that conversation because he's a geologist. That's his field. If it's about chocolate, he's a chocolatier. I'm going to talk to him about that in class, and he'll be excited to talk about it. So, you know, I have to have my plants in the class. And there's some people, and I'm going to point at Bram for this, that when I'm teaching a class, I will intentionally add like an extra 20 minutes or so to the class time, because I know I'm going to have a subject that Bram is going to be excited about. And I know that they are going to contribute in a very positive and interesting way to what I'm saying. And so Bram and I are able to play off of each other very well. And if class is dragging or people are not being interactive, I know I can look to Bram and say a few key things, and Bram will share and talk, and that gets everybody else feeling like the seal is broken and they have permission to share and engage then. So yeah, I've got my certain Brams, you know, different people that I know I can just kind of connect to. So yeah, that idea of needing to be around people is really critical. And we get really involved with who we are as the teacher, and don't think about that maybe the student isn't only there to learn about how to read a candle glass or, you know, yeah. So when we're talking about permissions, that's we could do a whole class on that. It's a wonderful subject. But even something as simple as you're wearing a really beautiful sacred necklace or a pendant or something, and somebody's like, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. And they reach out to touch it, and you're like, we do not touch the precious.
You know,
time.
Yeah, so black and brown people have history with this and hair, so it's not a far cry from oh my God, your hair is so pretty, and just touch. Or and maybe I should go beyond this to say you know, pregnant women on occasion. Like, there is something about if you stand out of the crowd in some way, shape, or form, you're not a common thing to behold. There is this like, oh, you must not have boundaries. And when it comes to sacred objects, they can carry Heidi touching pregnant tummies. Nope. And there is, when it comes to touching sacred objects, they emit an energy. And I imagine both the sacred objects and the person that it looks unique in some way, just people seem to have this like gravitational, I can't stop my hand. And it's like, no, this is, you need to stop your hand because we're about to fight over this.
And etiquette wise, let us be clear, it's absolutely fine to say, is it okay? May I touch that? Are you good with that? And the same thing goes with anything on a person's altar. You don't pick it up, you don't touch it if it doesn't belong to you. Now, if you're in my store, you're in Dahlia's store, and it's a display, that's one thing. But if it's a personal altar, you don't just go touching and picking up and everything. There is a theory about the pregnant tummies, actually. The idea is, and I was a Lamaze instructor for 20 years. And so this was a field that was very interesting to me. And the idea of it is that there comes a point in the pregnancy where your belly is big enough that it extends outside of your bubble. So you kind of have a bubble of personal space.
Sure.
And because the belly is out there, it feels more like public domain because
Oh,
it's not right up on your face and, super close to you. Now, I don't agree with that, but that
I
is a
don't
school of
either.
thought that people have said, is that it extends outside of your personal bubble. And
No,
so
my
people
bubble
feel more
grew.
inclined. Yeah.
My
My bubble's
bubble
around the belly. Thank you.
grew. Yeah,
And
that's
Heidi's
wild.
right. You do have to be very careful when you're asking, can I touch this? You don't say that en route to touching it.
No, no.
You got to understand that answer might be no.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Like with so many things in life, it's okay to say no. Even if it's somebody that seems okay, it's fine to say no. Just that's the answer. They get offended. That is their challenge that they're working
Right,
on.
then you know where they stand. It's not, boy,
Yeah.
when no is my favorite word.
No is very defining. And can I hug you today? No, I really don't want to be hugged. What? Well, you asked the question.
Yeah, that's
No, the
Mason
answer is
just laugh.
no.
Mommy, can I hug you? I don't want to hug right now. And then I'm like, later. And he's like, oh, okay, bye. Later is 5 minutes.
Yeah. And one of the things we run into online, I had a real challenge with this. So I just started getting involved with a forum that is for professional journalists mostly that contribute to a particular pagan magazine. And I fought against being involved with this so hard because they love intellectual debate about all things witchcraft, all things paganism. And it's just like Droll sitting back, puffing on the pipe and pontificating and writing these mile-long responses to shit. And I'm like, that is so just not where I am. I don't need to defend what I believe or what I think. I don't need somebody else to agree with me. I don't feel like I have a lot to contribute to those conversations. And I've got a friend that just kept, pulling and pulling and pulling. No, you'll love it. You need to be involved. And so I got involved and I've done a few things, but it still just feels weird because I'm not that person. And when you're in those online message groups, and I guess they don't call them message groups anymore, but like Facebook groups and Discord servers and stuff that are dedicated to a certain subject. And even if you're an expert on that subject, a lot of people don't know how to contribute positively to something you've said. So they just kind of pick it apart and look for the things that they can do better or that they know better about or that they believe that they can correct. And it's the upgraded version of internet trolls.
Oh,
It's like an intellectual one-upmanship that tends to happen. And that stuff just makes me so damn tired. And that's where I was saying, know when to speak and when not to speak, but also know how, if you need to have a healthy debate and say, I'm not real sure about that. Because of X, Y, and Z, can you unpack that a little bit for me? Or that hasn't been my experience. This has. And, how does that marry up with this, do you think? There's ways to approach it without saying, well, that's just wrong. Or, there's a lot of negative mess out there. That's just
right.
the stupidest thing I've ever heard,
And then has no real backup to why. Okay, you've opened up the conversation. Now let's talk about why you think it's
Yeah.
stupid. And well, it just is.
That's
No,
like
that's
on Amazon. If I get a 1-star book review and there's no text, it's just 1 star, but I'm not
don't
going to
even
tell
get
you
me
why.
started on those Amazon.
That could be that
I
the
didn't like the
mailman,
feel.
yeah, like the
What?
mailman was late getting their book to them and they give me 1 star.
Or I didn't like the feel of the paper. You know how many times I've
Yeah.
read that? I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, what kind of first world problem society do we live in? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I if somebody leaves a 1 or 2-star review and they say, I didn't enjoy the book because this was clumsy, there were too many grammar errors, or this was this part of the story didn't make any sense. Give me some reason why you didn't like it. That helps me learn. Not that I ever am going to read my reviews, but I mean, still.
Not
It's too
recommended.
soul crushing to read them. But yeah, it bothers me when people just chime in to complain. Or here's another big one. You work for a day and a half on an article or a column, you post it, and somebody's sole reply is TLDR. Too long, didn't read. Like, okay.
Right. Then like you didn't even have to comment
Yeah.
those 4
Thanks for
letters.
sharing. Yeah. Sorry I
Mm.
wasn't Twitter enough for you.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So what do you think about the role of elders in what we do?
That's interesting. There's a level of importance and respect that I have for people that have done this longer than I have, for people who've been around to see more. And so highly valued, but the rigidity that I come across of you cannot do this and you cannot do that is problematic, simply because oftentimes they're not correct. They have followed a system and an order that has worked for a number of years, and because they followed it to a T, it works. And I feel like in instances where they say something can't happen, it is often because they're afraid to see, or if it will work or if it won't work. It's kind of and there's a lot of gatekeeping that can take place.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of falls in line with this is what we do, this is how we do it, etc. What I meant by interesting was about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a shift where a lot of the people that were performing things that would be considered miraculous were sort of either retiring, or scandal was coming up, and it seemed like I recall somebody saying, yeah, that's because it's time for the next group of, or the next generation of healers and magical people to kind of step forward. And I was like, well, that's noble and all, but we don't have any experience. Like, what do you mean step forward? And now even just a couple of years later, I understand. But I still look to those individuals and what they did as a baseline. Like, I love Madame Blavatsky for anything mediumship or esoteric. She was a hard ass, and that's what made her amazing. And so reading her work, while I may not agree with it ethically all the time, she had a lot to contribute that I can learn from and develop in my own way. So I have a lot of respect for the elders, living and not.
When and one of the challenges we have with this is that I think that we always want to look at where we came from. We always want to acknowledge the fact that these elders are the people who really went to the front line. A lot of them were the ones who pioneered what we do, who did it when it was less safe to do so.
Yeah.
And so we acknowledge that, but sometimes they're not exactly people. I mean, they might be people we want to learn from, but they're not really people we would necessarily want to hang out with. And an example of that, I would think, is Marie Laveau, the first one, because there was a Marie Laveau too, who was her daughter. But from the evidence that we have, Marie Laveau was probably not a very kind person. We don't see a lot of evidence of her that reflects well on her personally, although her magical efforts were quite impressive. But I don't know that I would want to include her in. I sure wouldn't want her in my enemy base.
No.
But I don't know that she's somebody I would want to sit around and have brewskis with. She seemed very intense. She seemed very vindictive in some of the work that she did. Probably rightly so. I'm sure she had absolutely good reason to be as arrogant isn't the right word, but she was very hardcore. And I have a feeling she was one of those my way or the highway kind of people.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact, I mean, I think is very resourceful that she was she did hair for a reason. I mean, because she could then collect the hair of everybody in town and
Mm.
use it energetically. And she was an amazing conjure person. You know, there's people in our community here that are elders, and so we treat them with dignity and respect as much as possible. But man, I'm uncomfortable being around them because of different personality aspects that they have. So, I mean, it's important to really get clear within ourselves what we're going to do with that information. On the other side, I have people that get, like, we had this one person in our pagan community that has run a group for maybe 2 or 3 years. And he was butthurt that I didn't include him in an elders panel. And I was bringing up people that, had been involved for 20, 30, 40 years.
Wow.
And he was like, well, why didn't I get invited? I run a group. Like, bitch, you just got here. Just take a breath, okay? Take a minute, I respect the fact that you run a group. That's not easy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an elder. So yeah, that's something to look at. And also, one of the things I would bring up, one of the things that happens in the Sacramento area, not as much as it used to, is that we used to have a number of different practicing groups. And so when we're looking at circle versus coven, the usual understanding is that a coven is closed and you're only meeting with very specific people all the time. A circle is open and they have open rituals where you can invite other people and you never know who's going to show up, kind of thing. And so we had a lot of circles that would have, 60, 75 people at their functions. And it was a lot of fun because you got to see the ways that different people worked. And there was a lot of etiquette that went along with going to someone else's ritual, especially if you are not familiar with how they work or what they do. And ritual space is, of course, very sacred. And a lot of times you don't know what's going to crop up. There's a lot of practices in Wicca specifically that can be a little bit hairball. I mean, there's some groups that work skyclad, and so they expect no one's going to wear clothing. And that's a little something you want to find out ahead of time.
Right.
It's not as though Wiccan groups are not usually doing animal sacrifice or anything like that. That's that uncomfortable. But something as simple as our group in the circle, we move the energy counterclockwise when we're moving it around the circle. And we do that because it mimics the way energy moves in nature. Electricity moves it counterclockwise in a circuit. The earth turns counterclockwise in its orbit. The earth moves counterclockwise around the sun. When we're looking at a sundial, which is where the idea of clockwise came up with, that is a reflection. That's not how it's actually moving.
Right.
And so we tried working counterclockwise. We found that the energy moves faster and smoother with fewer hiccups. And so we did that. Well, when you've got a lot of traditional Wiccans come into our circle, it's bad to move it counterclockwise.
They're like, what
they'll see us start to cast hand to hand and talk about in with the left, out with the right. And they're like, whoa, I can't be a part of this bullshit. And get really freaked out. And so you need to learn about the group you're going into to make sure that you're going to be compatible before you just show up because they happen to be having a ritual. That's what I was actually getting to, is that there's certain things that can be really off-putting or difficult if you're not used to what's happening.
Same thing can happen in the energetic spaces. I've found myself having conversations with people who are like, well, I don't know about this kind of energy and that kind of energy. And I'd say if you're uncomfortable, then that's enough. And then, as you zoom out or remove yourself from the discomfort, it's worth evaluating what was there. And that evaluation might lead you to realize that, like, say, African practices, the deities are so ancient that there is a density to them. So it feels very heavy when you are interacting with ancient deities as opposed to some of the newer ones, some of the younger ones. I mean, if you're talking Greece, Rome, they are new. relatively speaking, when it comes to humanity and even what was here before we were. So as far as like traditions and how energy moves and what it's supposed to feel like, there's things that are I would say reawakening that don't always feel as bright and sunny as people are used to, and
Yeah.
their first go-to is, "Oh, no. Oh, no, don't do that. That's not okay," and it's like, well, if you go to Peru, if you go to Africa, if you go anywhere below the equator, this may actually be what's normal.
Yeah.
So,
If you go to a voodoo ritual, you might not know that might take 3 days. You need to find these things out. You might not know somebody's, uh, possibly going to be ridden during that time, and you're going to be watching deity come into, or Lawa come into a person
yeah.
and become somebody different. You need to learn about the tradition. You don't just go because it sounds cool and like something you might want to do. You got to learn about it ahead of time. And that is just part of etiquette and just part of respect, just paying the respect to the group that's kind enough to let you participate in their sacred practices. And you've got to imagine, I mean, here's an example. I was coming out one time into our Wiccan circle, and I was coming in after the fact. They were already all out in the circle. Everybody had already been smudged and cleaned and everything. Eric was actually in the circle, and something had happened where I was coming out later. And I came in through the gate of the circle, and there's this dude there who he had never been there before. He had asked to participate in our circle, smoking a cigarette. I'm like, what just happened? No. I mean, I was upset. And
Yeah.
it's disrespectful. He goes, "Oh, it's sacred tobacco." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's a fucking Winston. Put it out." Just you have to be respectful.
Snappapacho.
This is like somebody invited you into their church.
And you lit up
And
a cigarette.
yes, and as a church, I've been in lots of churches that started doing stuff I was not comfortable with. In Kentucky, we've got rattlesnake handlers in our Pentecostal churches. And I tell you what, them fuckers come out, I'm out the door. That's not my game. I see the little boxes coming. I'm like, all right, well, mama's got to leave now. Sunday school's over. Got to go, because that's not something that I'm comfortable working with. We have, but talking in tongues, sign me up for that. I'll watch that all day long. That feels sacred to me.
Right.
So, it's got to do with what you feel comfortable doing. But you hit the nail on the head. In any energetic work, and it might not be ritual, if it's a Reiki practice or a Reiki session, if it's a past life regression, whatever it might be, if you begin to feel uncomfortable, number one, it doesn't have to be in that moment, but at some point you should look at why you became uncomfortable. You should challenge that and see if that's valid, or if it's that you have a boundary up or an obstacle that doesn't need to be there. Maybe a conditioned response. But also, if you continue to participate feeling uncomfortable, you will contaminate the energy of that process.
More than likely.
And so that I get that a lot, when I'm cleansing people, somebody's like, "Well, I'm Christian. I don't believe in any of this shit, but I know I've got a curse, so you need to do it. So just do it." Like,
Oh my God.
no, we're not going to do it that way. If you're that afraid of what I'm doing, if you're that that nervous or reticent about this, then you're not ready for this. You need to go find someone in your faith who can help you with this.
And there's so many other options. Like,
Yeah.
oh goodness. So, regarding the other aspects of ethics, what else was on your list?
I think we hit on most of them. One of them is one of the challenges of etiquette is that, again, not just in the realm of, I don't even want to say supernatural people, because I consider magic to be natural, but in the realm of people who are comfortable with the things we're talking about, in that community of people, there are a huge number of neurodiverse people. And in the last 30 years, even though part of us can say, okay, we have more neurodiverse people. People are now having more of a neurodiverse action or presentation than they used to because of additives in our food, because of poisons in our air and water, because of all of these different things having a neurological effect, because of the advent of the internet retraining how our neurons work. There's all these theories about why we have a greater presentation of neurodiverse people. Another idea that's very popular and important is that we simply have definitions to things that have always existed.
Yeah.
And so we now have a DSM category for that. And so we now have names for things that were once just eccentric or Uncle Jack's a little bit off, whatever it might be, out of what could be considered a normal range of behavior. I think it's something in between. I think we do have more definition to it, but I think we're also seeing an uptick in the presentation of those symptoms. When that happens in a community that is very welcoming and loving and compassionate toward those experiences, we're going to have more of those people butting up against each other.
Mm.
My neurodivergence is uncomfortable with your neurodivergence kind of thing. And so as leaders, we have to know how to manage that in a way that engenders compassion and patience on both sides. And I think that becomes a part of etiquette as well, is having to be in a public situation or a community situation where you can feel you're getting triggered, or you can see someone else is being triggered, and to understand how to respond to that and how to mitigate that so that everybody is okay. And sometimes you want to take them through that discomfort a little bit so that they can get to the other side. And
Right.
sometimes you know that that's not where it's going, that it's bigger than that, and so I think that's another part of it, is just knowing how to manage those difficult situations.
What would you give as far as tips? Because I know when I've had to mitigate what it looks like to mitigate these situations on my end of things has always been guiding people through a level of understanding just that people operate, function differently, like Bram was saying here.
Yeah.
Um, and trying to bring forward a person's natural compassion. But never have I been able to say, I mean, it's never been a goal, right? But to just make everything okay. It's just
Mm,
been like, you stay in your bubble, they'll stay in theirs, unless there is harm,
yeah.
except in the case of harm. Have
You
you
know,
ever?
I have. And, one of the biggest challenges you have is when you have a narcissistic personality.
Mm,
Um, and because the narcissist is going to have a natural drive to interact with other people. That's part of their, I don't want to say psychosis, but it's part of their um, modality, is
yeah.
that they need to be around others to reinforce this behavior. But it's also, and it's a complicated and difficult behavior to be around if you're not familiar with it. Especially, it can be really stunning that this is happening and that you're in this conversation at all. But it's important to remember, and I'm just using this as an example, that we don't have narcissistic babies. Narcissism is an adapting coping skill that is developed out of trauma. That doesn't mean that you have to have that person in your life, but it does mean that when you happen to encounter a narcissist, or you start to feel that energy of it, because it has a really specific energy, that you understand that what is happening right now, this control battle that you're feeling, comes from a place of extreme trauma that has
Mm,
happened to this person. And I think there is a predisposition toward that management style. But I don't think that, I think if you don't have an instigating trauma that happens to activate it,
right.
if I'm making any sense. So
It
that's an
is.
example of a way that to engender compassion, you have to, in a way, feed that narcissism and let them be okay. You have to let them know, hey, I'm not challenging you. You're absolutely right. And I appreciate that you blah, 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 blah. And that can guide the room toward seeing, hey, this person is challenged and they're just trying to participate.
Mm.
And this is the way that they're able to participate. Sometimes you have people, especially people who have varying types of autism, who what they do is info dump. And so sharing all that they can think of in that moment about the subject is their way of interacting with other people. And that's what that's where their value comes from, is, hey, I did this and I know about this and I've read extensively on this and I want to share this. And there's people that are shy that sometimes feel uncomfortable with that because they feel like, I can't compete with that, I can't do that. And
Mm.
so it's just a matter of navigating the waters and seeing, kind of intuitively and empathically getting a feel of each of your people. If you've got 20 people or 4 people, where are you at? How can we maximize your comfort in this environment so that you feel heard, so that you don't feel overwhelmed, so that you can see that I still have control over the class, so we're all safe here. And it's not just a sharing free for all, unless that's how the class is set up. I think it's just know your audience and help to mitigate it that way. And also hoping beyond hope that there are other compassionate people in that group that can assist with that. Because a lot of times it's not just what you say, it's the management of the energy that's happening.
Yeah,
So
for
you
sure.
can quiet things if it's getting crazy. Or
Absolutely.
I say crazy, that's a bad choice of words, but if it's getting combative, or if somebody, one of the times where it really happens is when you teach a class and you just feel like somebody's just trying to take over the class. Like, hey, do you want to come up here and teach this? Because you're interjecting every other sentence here, and I've got a PowerPoint. Okay. So yeah, it's just hoping for compassionate folks, hoping that people come away with a positive feeling. I'm sure that you and I have both come away from classes where we're like, man, that was just a shitstorm. I was not on my game, and it seemed like everybody was, working against each other instead of as a cohesive student body. I know I'm rattling here, but that's kind of where I am with it. Is that, God dang, we just need more compassion in this world. We need more compassionate boundaries. If people would learn how to have boundaries without being gatekeepers and
Mm.
ready to fight those boundaries off the get-go, if they could just firmly defend the boundaries with love and compassion, gosh, my job would be so much easier.
So
It turns into a contest. And one of the things, I was just talking to my son about this, in fact, or my grandson too, because my grandson was asking for a relationship. What's the best relationship advice you ever had, Mama? What is that?
oh,
And I said,
nice.
this really goes, and he's 19. He's good. He I got it from an unusual source, and it was from Dr. Phil. I quote him a lot, but
That is
it was about
unusual.
interpersonal relationships, but it really applies to everybody. And what he said was, most people fight to win. When you're in an argument or a conflict with somebody, you want to win that conflict. You want them to get your point of view and to acquiesce to it. You want them to win. And the thing is that if you win, that means you're married to a loser. Somebody has to lose. And that should not be the point of a conflict, is to be a winner and a loser. The point of
Right.
a conflict should be that everybody walks away feeling heard, that everybody walks away feeling like, that's a really valid argument. I don't agree with it, but you have really valid points. I hear you. I see you. I can understand being, from your perspective, why that is the case. Then everybody wins.
Right.
But when we're trying to line it up to winners and losers, especially in a debate or an argument, it's never going anywhere good. Someone is going to walk away from that feeling defeated and unheard and sad and minimized in some way. So that's where I'm at there. I took us over.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, no, no. I mean, so it sounds like truly, there's different things to consider with magical ethics. Would you mind rattling that list off again if you've got
Sure, if
it?
I can see, because I crossed them off as we talked. But we want to be thoughtful about when is the right time to share and talk and when is not. We don't want to overthink that. We want to, but we just want to be mindful. And if you notice, my throat's getting a little bit tired and I'm not the one teaching this class, you might want to think about that. Or if you feel like people are looking at you, wanting you to say something, you don't have to feel pushed to say something, but that can be a cue that if you do have something that might be worth sharing, to do so. Having the ability to have healthy debate without needing to be a winner or a loser. Touching items or invading somebody's personal space or altar space or spiritual space without asking permission. Certainly not doing it if you are told don't do that. Um, what do we do with elders? Do we respect them for what they've done, or do we evaluate them as who they are and what they're contributing or not contributing right now? I think that's a personal decision. We have to decide for ourselves that. Really thinking about how we incorporate other neurodiverse modalities into our world. And are you just saying all narcissists are assholes? I don't want anything to do with them. Are you just saying I can never be around a I don't know, like a manic depressive person because when they're depressed, it just triggers me and I can't do it? Are you shutting out other people based on a diagnosis and a presentation? Or are you willing to judge each person by person and see where they fit into your world and know when to observe something like in a circle and just see what's going on, learn ahead of time what to do, and know when to critique and offer, well, somebody says, look, this, I don't know what to do. We just keep forgetting what to do in ritual. Well, in my experience, if we write down little notes here and there, we can remember better. Do you offer, or is your critiquing annoying? So that's what I would say for ethics. Or etiquette? What do you think?
And what I think is the underlying path to all of that, as you were saying at the end, is that the compassion piece. If you can, is that the right word? Why do I feel like that's not the right word? It wasn't compassion. It was crap.
I said compassion, but also empathy or just relatability, inclusivity. You don't have to include everybody. I think that that's a myth. I don't think any of us can do that. I really don't. I think we can try, but I think it's an exhaustive effort that is better left alone. But just to approach from a position of understanding and compassion.
Yeah. I mean,
Some of that involves, I understand where this is coming from, but this is something that I can't have in my life.
Even when it comes to the elder piece and some of those other pieces that you mentioned, it seems like with the approach of compassion, we can go a lot further and then, distill down to specific situations. So, excellent. Magical etiquette is definitely appropriate energetically as well. And this has been a great introduction because I feel like there's so much more that could be said on topic, but it's brought both deeper awareness for me and then like these really beautiful memories of different situations I've been in where I've seen the positive aspect of what you're talking about. So this has been fantastic. And you're definitely going to want to watch the replay on this, like, subscribe, do all the things that we didn't talk about in the beginning that we normally do. And if we touched on something in all of this that you heard that you'd like to hear more of, let us know.
Let us know.
But
one thing I would say just very quickly as an afterthought, when you have been in a situation where someone has extended grace to you, but when you knew you were struggling, or when you knew you have challenges in social interaction, and someone was gracious to you, that is the most abundant and delicious feeling. And it makes you want to do that for other people.
Yeah.
So if you have times in your life that that's happened for you, see if you can sit with that for a little while, remember that, and understand the value that that had for you, and actively look for places where you can extend that and put that out into the world. We will all be better off.
Well said. And with that, we will catch you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Bye, everyone.
Bye.